A good tip for carrying out any upgrade is when you've unpacked your car, do keep the little plastic stand that it was fixed to its packaging on, because it's very handy to use as a stand, so at least you can run the wheels. First thing we need to do is remove the body pins, and these can just be pushed from one side and they'll come out. They are handed, so it is a good idea just to remember where they went when you come to put it back together. If I just zoom in, I'll try and show you on, so I'd always recommend your thumb on one side, finger on the other, just push so that it comes off and then lift the pin away. The body then should just lift off its mountings and the aerial will then come through the body. Now this kit's got one of our LED sets in, so that just needs unplugging. First we need to remove the rear pod, which is actually very straightforward. I'd always recommend disconnecting the motor at this point. You'll see there are just some small connectors. They should just pull apart like that. Now we need to just slacken off the shock. I just take a couple of turns off the front screw and then just remove completely. You'll find when you remove that there will be an O-ring on the screw, and underneath the shock you'll find there'll be a small plastic insert. So just put those to one side. Remove your aerial tube because you don't want to bend or damage it. If we just put the car on its side now, you can see on the bottom that there are two screws here, and depending on the length of your car they will be in any of these series of holes. This is obviously quite a long wheelbase, they're in the rear ones. This is the FXX Ferrari. What we need to do is slacken those screws off. There are two of them. With those removed, that pod will just come away from the main chassis. So now you can pop the chassis to one side, and then we're left with our rear pod to then disassemble. First thing to do, remove the driving wheels. If you hold both the tyres, pop the spanner that comes with the kit and turn anti-clockwise, so to the left, you'll find the nut will stay inside the spanner. Turn the unit round, again hold both tyres and remove the nut. They can now go to one side. These wheels will then pull off. One side on the near side you'll find there'll be a small end cap, and the other side there won't. Now we need to disassemble this pod to access the motor. So the first thing we need to do is remove the differential cover. Just stand the motor up on its side. Find there's two small screws. Just turn those, and again pop those to one side. This cover, just ease it off the back end, that'll lift free. You then need to just rotate the gear differential until the grub screw on the pinion gear on the motor can be seen. Then with a 1.5mm X wrench, just undo that to the left anti-clockwise and that'll come free. The gear diff will then just lift off, put to one side. We now need to slacken off these three screws here, just slightly smaller than most. And now on both sides we just need to remove these two screws. They're opposite each other. and then the two on the side without the gear diff. This pod will now pull off, and that will come out complete. Just move this away. Now you'll find this top plate will just lift away. Just check this orientation, because when we put it back we'll want this little notch for the motor wires to go through. Now to remove the motor, you'll see there are two screws here. You just need to slacken off. Don't need to come out completely and the motor will come free. And the motor comes away from the mounting. So on the motor, just note that one of the wires, the black wire, is always longer. And then that side of the motor needs to point downwards when we fit it. And on the front, you'll see there are two holes opposite each other, and that's where we're going to be mounting in here. So with black wire down, place the motor through onto its plate, and then we're just going to try and locate this bottom screw into one of those holes. So we wind it on, you'll just feel it starts to bite. Just get a couple of turns on and then look down. You just then want to locate the top one, and again get a few turns on. You don't want to over tighten these, you just want it to be tight enough to hold the motor sort of square when we set the gear mesh in a minute. Okay, we continue to reassemble. What we need to do is put this pod back on the bottom, and again there are some holes for pins to line up. Get those in place. The important bit is this top plate. You want to make sure that the wires come through this hole and they're not pinched at all. So drop the pins in this side. Line it up. Check that both the wires are through. Once you're happy, you can hold that and just see that everything lines up. We just want to pop one screw in each of the sides, just to make sure that it's all held in place. At this point, that should all then stay together, and you can go through and add the remainder of the screws through into the bottom, which were the smaller ones if you remember we've got here, and then the screws into the side. So if I go ahead and do that off camera and come back, now we're in a position to set the gear mesh for the motor. So bring your stand back. We need to just put the differential on, make sure that it's sat down. Now we need to put the pinion gear on the motor. Do just note that the standard motors, I'm not sure if you can see that, has got a flat spot on, and that's where the grub screw needs to locate. However, the uprated motor hasn't. So what we need to do, just make the top of the pinion gear flush with the motor. Just tighten that grub screw down. Now we need to just make sure that those two gears aren't too tight. So at this point I just slacken off very fractionally the two mounting screws. I'm going to use a piece of paper, just ordinary paper, to put it through those gears and turn the mesh, and it'll pull the paper through. And can you see that just crinkles the paper? By doing that, we're going to set the distance, and we're then in a position to just tighten down both of those screws. Into the motor. Just check then again that paper runs through. It should then run very smoothly. Okay, now put the cover on, and just slots on the top. If you remember, there are two screws in the front which we just need to wind in. We're ready to attach the two driving wheels. So to reinstall the wheels, what we need to do is take the first wheel, mount it up, and you'll see there's a hex in the back of the wheel. Needs to marry up with that. Then we need to drop a little bush, and you may just need to make sure that it goes over. Load your nut onto the end of your spanner and then just wind a couple of turns on. Same with the other side. This one's actually got that additional space, if you remember, so that can be mounted in the back of the wheel. And that groove needs to meet with the two ends of the pin. And again, drop your spacer in, just check it's over the thread, load up your driver, put a couple of turns on. Now, as we did before, just hold both your drive wheels and tighten up the nuts. Like that. We're now ready to put the chassis and the pod back together. So to put the pod back into the chassis, start with the chassis upside down. What we need to look for in the bottom of the chassis are the two holes. If you look here on this particular kit, they're at the back where the pod was mounted. Line that up, and as before, little back turn, drop in and then tighten those up. Check at this point that your two motor wires are actually coming through to the front. And we then just need to mount up the rear shock. If you make the pod hang off the back of your work stand, you'll find this much easier. I'll just zoom in to show you closer. This spacer needs to drop down in that section, and you'll see there's a recess that it'll sit in like that. Then you want to just lift that pod up so that the loop of the shock goes on. And remember that this screw had a O-ring on. It goes in the front. Again, you can now slide that on the stand. Tighten that down, and remember to tighten down the front screw also. Just check that that pod runs free. Now we need to connect up the motor wires that are here. At this point, make sure you get your colours the right way around, so obviously black to black, and they should push in so there's no metal showing after the connectors. So to install the aerial tube, what we need to do is take the end of the aerial wire, thread it in the end, and I find if you just twist the tube round as you push a small portion of the wire up, what we're looking for is we're watching for the end of the aerial to come out of the end of the tube, and then when it does, you can then just pull that wire and mount the tube in its holder, and we can now then mount our body back up. Just the body will then drop down on the mountings, and then we can just put the clips back, push them in through the holes in the body posts. And then we're ready to go outside for testing. I hope this helps anybody with the upgrades. If you've got any questions, comments or anything, and please do rate the video. Thanks for watching.